Welcome back. Let's think about elasticity and revenue using a case study. So to do this, let's look at the market for oil. So we're going to think about the market for oil. So this is crude oil, right? Pumped out of the ground, maybe drilled offshore, etc. That kind of oil. That's what we're looking at, the market for oil. And the event we want to look at is what happens if there's a production technology improvement. So in this case, it's fracking. So our event that we're going to look at, is the development of fracking. So the development of fracking. Now, as analysts, we don't really think about fracking from a normative standpoint. We're looking at this from an objective standpoint. We're trying to think about what are the effects in this market of this invention, this technological improvement of fracking. So to do that, we're going to use our supply and demand model. So let's go ahead and set it up, but don't draw in your curves just yet. So we've got price, we've got quantity. So as we draw our curves in, we want to be a little bit more thoughtful about it than maybe we are in some other instances. So what does the demand for oil look like in the short run? You could almost generalize this and think about the demand for gasoline in the short run. It really doesn't matter what the price is. We need it, right? I got to get to work tomorrow. I got to drive there. If gas is $10 a gallon, I probably have to pay it until I can find some sort of substitute or a workaround. So in the short run, the demand for gasoline and oil is pretty inelastic, meaning quantity doesn't respond very much to a change in price. So what does that look like when we're drawing in our curve? That means it's a pretty steep curve. At a high price, what's our quantity? Drop the price way down low. Oh, our quantity didn't change very much, right? That's inelastic. So our curve is a pretty steep demand curve when we're thinking about an inelastic market. In fact, we could write that out on the side if we want. Right, the demand for oil is inelastic. Inelastic. So that's just our reminder later, right? The demand for oil is inelastic. Now the supply curve, we can just kind of throw one in there. We'll go ahead and throw it in at sort of that 45-degree angle that most of us draw them at. So this is our supply of oil. And let's go ahead and mark in our initial price. So we'll call that P1. And our initial quantity. We'll call that one Q1. All right, so we've got our initial price and quantity. And now we need to model in this development of fracking. So to do that, we can use our three-step process. So step 1, which curve. Step 2, which direction. And step 3, what happens? All right, so if fracking comes along, an improvement in production technology, which curve is that going to affect? Well, that's going to be a story about supply. Our second step, which direction? So supply will increase. At each price, sellers are now willing to sell more. So supply is going to shift to the right. So our third step is let's draw it in and see what happened. Okay, so supply shifts to the right. And where do we end up? We end up with price decreasing and quantity increasing. So what are our results? Price decreased and quantity increased. But what we want to know is what happened to the revenue of these oil companies. Did this help them? Did it hurt them? What was the effect? So from this, the decrease in price and the increase in quantity, we want to look at our model of supply and demand And we want to think about, does the increase in quantity make up for the decrease in price? So that's our question. So does that increase in quantity make up for that decrease in price? In other words, what happens to revenue? Did revenue increase or decrease? So let's look over here at our supply and demand diagram and let's see if we can figure it out. So let's start by just sort of dotting in the initial revenue area, right? So what is revenue? It's the quantity that's sold times the price each is sold for. So it's that original price to the original quantity. It's this big rectangle. And so we're just going to dot that whole thing in. You're probably quicker at dotting it in than me. All right, that's our initial revenue. So maybe we should make some notes over here. All right, so our initial revenue. So our initial revenue is that big rectangle that we've now dotted in. Now, what's revenue after the supply curve has shifted? So it's the new quantity and the new price, right? So firms are now selling more, so their quantity has increased and their price has decreased. Now they're getting this lower price, so they're not getting as much for each barrel of oil pumped out and sold. So it's this rectangle below the new price and up to the new quantity. So if we go ahead and we just maybe use slashes to mark this new one. I know it's getting kind of messy for sure. Understood. So how does this new revenue area compare to the initial revenue? Right? So this new revenue, let's just call it that. This new revenue, or revenue 2, is which area? It's the one that we drew the slashes in. So where did this firm gain revenue from this increase in quantity, and where did they lose revenue from this decrease in price? So the firm lost this revenue from the old price, but they gained a little bit of revenue from selling a few more. Which one wins out? Clearly, the amount of revenue these firms have lost is much greater than the amount of revenue they gained from that extra quantity. So that initial revenue was much greater than the new revenue. So what's the answer to our question of, does this increase in quantity make up for a decrease in price? The answer is no. What happened to revenue? So revenue declined. So how can we maybe see this? Well, you've got a large price, so our initial revenue was a large price times a large quantity. What about the new revenue? Where is its price? Let's call it a smaller price. In this case, a smaller price. I guess we could have said lower price. So a smaller price times almost the same quantity, right? So we'll say, again, a large quantity. So the firm gained a little bit on quantity and they lost a lot on price when we have this inelastic demand. I know it's kind of complicated the first time through, but with some practice, I bet you get the hang of it. Thanks for working through the problem, and we'll see you next time.